Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of this Top 10 is a little bit near and dear to my heart. The Top 10 Rowdy Roddy Piper moments. And as you may or may not have known, just a few days ago, Rowdy Roddy Piper had passed. I am doing this tribute as a top 10 in memory, as a tribute to him and his legendary storied career. Just a backstory as to why this is so emotional to me. About 7 years old, I may have just turned 7, is when I first started watching professional wrestling. Now, I had seen it before, and my mother even told me stories of me emulating Jimmy Superfly Snuka by jumping off of the bed and certain other things, doing the Superfly Splash. But my first real solid memory, and the first thing that turned professional wrestling into from just another show that I had seen on TV, into appointment television watching every Saturday morning, and I haven't gone back since to not being, was seeing Rowdy Roddy Piper show up in the WWE, first as a manager for Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff and Dr. D. David Schultz, and then transitioning into Piper's Pit and all the great stuff he did that we're going to talk about here. This is the top 10 Rowdy Roddy Piper moments. Probably one of my two favorite wrestlers of all time, him and Mick Foley, are both right there. So we're going to go right into it. First off, number 10. Rowdy Roddy Piper as part of Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. The show was goofy, it was corny, it was 80s cartoon, but he played the perfect heel, he played the perfect villain on the show. It was fun, it was exciting. I enjoyed watching him on that. One of my favorite cartoon memories growing up is watching that show, and one of the reasons why was because of Piper. Now our number 9. This one's a more sentimental one than anything else. It's from WCW Starrcade 1996, Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Not the greatest match, not the best scientific example of what wrestling should be. However, I really thoroughly enjoyed it because we finally seen the reversal of the original feud, which was Hulk Hogan as the mega monster babyface and Rowdy Roddy Piper as the mega heel. Now we see the roles reversed. Hogan is firmly entrenched as the heel, the leader of the nefarious NWO, and here comes a guy from his past, Rowdy Roddy Piper, to challenge him. Piper picks up the win in a non-title match, which was kind of goofy and silly. It's WCW, I don't need to say more than that. However, it was just cool seeing that moment again, seeing Piper and Hogan again, seeing Piper and Hogan with the roles reversed. Seeing them the way that I seen him as a kid. I seen him as a kid as Piper was my hero, and I didn't really care about Hogan. A lot of other kids were a different way, so it kind of was cool to finally have it come around to where Piper was everybody's hero and everybody hated Hogan. Now our number 8 is from Wrestlemania 12, Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Goldust in the Backlot Brawl. Just a fun little match, a great little hardcore thing going around. Piper coming up in an up-and-coming Goldust who had a little bit of momentum, had a little bit of steam, but this map really put Goldust onto the map, made him a big star, made him someone that was formidable, someone that could wrestle a legend like Piper on the grandest stage of them all, WrestleMania. It was a really fun match, a little bit of goofiness in it, of course, but still an interesting and fun match, and probably if you haven't had a chance to watch it in a while, go back and watch. It's a lot better than you probably remember it being, and a lot of people give it crap because of the OJ sequence in the middle of it, but it was still fun and exciting. Now, our number 7. I'm going to talk about a feud that probably a lot of you guys haven't seen. And it is worth going out and searching for this. I haven't seen any of it since probably the early to mid-90s in the tape trading era when everybody would trade VHS tapes. That, for you younger fans, I understand it's different. This would be the equivalent of one person has a YouTube video and he has to share it individually with each person by sending it to them. I guess would be the equivalent of it. And that's what tape traders would do. Someone would have a videotape of a certain territory, in this case Portland, and they would send you Portland tapes to show you what Piper did in Portland, and you would send them tapes from WWE or WWF or NWA or AWA or wherever you were from of your local stuff with your local guys that they were interested in. And that's how you traded and shared, and that's how I seen this feud, which we're going to actually talk about the feud, Chavo Guerrero Sr. and Rowdy Roddy Piper, which is probably one of the most personal and most heated feuds I've ever seen. A lot of racially charged remarks between the both of them, a lot of very personal barbs at each other. Just the way that a feud should probably be ran. There was a lot of hatred in it, and a lot of animosity, and a lot of just vitriol that made it such a good feud, and made both of these guys were great wrestlers at the time, and just made everything so much more fun to watch. Now, our number 6 probably is a way more important moment in the WWE, that time WWF's history, than that they ever talk about, and that is from MTV, The War to Settle the Score, Hulk Hogan versus Rowdy Roddy Piper. Yes, I know, again, we're mentioning Piper and Hogan. This was at the beginning and the height of the Rock and Wrestling connection. This had Cyndi Lauper tied in. This had Lou Albano tied in. This had everything. Wendy Richter. It had Piper, Orndorff. Everything was tied in. And this was the show that laid the groundwork for something we're going to talk about a little bit later, and also laid the groundwork for WWE going from a Northeast territory into a global phenomenon. This was one of the things that really broke them out of that New York, Philadelphia, Boston area and took them to the world. They were on MTV, which was cool and hip at the time. It was the biggest thing going. When MTV hit cable airwaves, it was huge. The impact that MTV had, anything that went on there got the rub. I mean, bands that went on there on MTV became megastars immediately. So Hogan and Piper going on MTV and wrestling became megastars and household names immediately. A good match, probably the best match of the Hogan-Piper era. This was great. It was fun. It set up things to come along, and I don't want to spoil it by telling you now, but we're going to get into something that came from it in a little bit. Now, our number 5, probably the segment that Roddy Piper's most known from. As part of Piper's Pit, he's interviewing Jimmy Superfly Snuka. In the process of the interview, he starts to insult his heritage, starts throwing fruit at him, gets a coconut and smashes it over his head, thus leading to their feud. Just an amazing moment, one of the all-time great moments in the history of wrestling with two of the all-time great wrestlers. Piper's Pit is and always will be the best wrestling interview segment for a lot of reasons. Just because of how good Piper was, because of the quality of the people he would bring on, he would get the best out of everybody, whether it be Snuka, whether it be the Haiti Kid, whether it be Bruno Sammartino, whether it be a job guy like Frank Williams, who he had an amazing Piper's Pit with. This was the template for everything that we've seen from then on, the Edge's show, the Cutting Edge, the highlight reel with Jericho, Carlito's Cabana, the Brother Love Show, everything, every one of these kind of show, the Miz TV, all come from this. And the first is still the best. It's still the one that's held up the best. It's still the funniest and most interesting. And out of Piper's Pit, this is the iconic segment. This is the one that everybody remembers. Snuka getting hit in the head with a coconut. What more can you say? Our number 4 Rowdy Roddy Piper moment was Rowdy Roddy Piper versus the Mountie at Royal Rumble 1992. Piper was in full face mode by this point. The fans had adopted and loved him for a long time by now. This was Piper winning the Intercontinental title, and it kind of felt like kind of like they gave it to him as a career, kind of like if you're going to retire, you get a gold watch kind of deal. It was a nice topping at the time when the Intercontinental title really, really meant something. It wasn't what it is now where anybody can win it and it's held by nobodies. At the time, the Intercontinental title really meant that you were somebody. It meant that you were the number 2 guy in the WWE. And Piper took it. He held it. He held it with pride. It was great to finally see him win a championship in the WWE and get some recognition for how great he was. Now our number 3 is outside of the world of professional wrestling. Rowdy Roddy Piper was one of the first wrestlers to really cross over into the mainstream, and probably the best movie that a wrestler's ever been in would have to be They Live, or ever starting would have to be They Live. Just a great science fiction movie about aliens pretending to be humans and Piper getting a special pair of glasses that lets him see who is who. Just an epic movie with an epic fight scene in it. Everything about it was good. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I know that if this is the first time you're seeing it, it's going to be very campy and the graphics and all that's going to be a little bit goofy. But remember, this was made in the mid-1980s. This isn't something that came out of Michael Bay's basement last week, where the explosions look like the most amazing thing ever. This was made in a time where science fiction movies were kind of campy and cheesy. However, this had a great story. Piper played a great protagonist. Probably one of the best movies starring a wrestler there's ever been. Number 2 is something we touched on number 6 with the war to settle the score. The war to settle the score led to Wrestlemania 1. Probably the biggest event in the WWF history. We've all heard Vince McMahon say it. This was either sink or swim. The main event of the show was Piper and Orndorff versus Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. Now, if you really think about that, think about how WrestleMania is. WrestleMania was highlighted by a tag team match. No title on the line. Just that big of a feud that they had drew in Cyndi Lauper, they had drew in Mr. T, Liberace was part of the show, Muhammad Ali was a guest additional referee, Pat Patterson refereed the match. It was just an amazing congregation of everything that made WWF successful in the 80s came together on this one show, and this was sink or swim. So basically it was sold off of Piper and his cronies versus Hogan and his friends, which it went through. The end comes when Orndorff accidentally gets hit by Cowboy Bob Orton, by his cast, the infamous cast. The faces pick up the win. However, the show itself was a mega success, by no small part in what Rowdy Roddy Piper did to build the show. Whether it was making fun of Mr. T, and again, saying a lot of racially insensitive stuff. This was a different time and a different era where stuff like that flew. So if you're watching it now, just remember, at the time, stuff like that was acceptable, unfortunately. Times have changed. However, this was the groundwork, and just as big as everybody wants to say Hulk Hogan made the WWF what it is. Vince McMahon made the WWF what it is. Hulk Hogan doesn't become the mega babyface that everybody loves without the mega heel to fight against. Luke Skywalker had Darth Vader. You know, if you go through history, Captain Kirk had Khan. Every great hero has to have a great villain. Batman has Joker. X-Men have Magneto. Go through and through. Every great hero in history has had a great villain. And this was no exception. Hulk Hogan had his Rowdy Roddy Piper, who more than lived up being a great villain, probably one of the great villains in all of media of all time. Now, before we get into our number one, we do a little thing here on Heel Heat on the top 10s called the best of the rest. Basically, this is the stuff that was considered for the countdown, but didn't quite make it. First up, from WrestleMania number 3, Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Adrian Adonis. Great match, a great feud. They feuded over Piper's Pit versus Adonis's Flower Shop, which were two talk segments. Adonis had kind of took over when Piper took a hiatus. I believe it was to film They Live, or it may have been to film something else. Came back, they wrestled. This was to be Piper's retirement match. It was a hair versus hair match. Piper picks up the win. Brutus Beefcake helps him shave Adonis's head, thus transitioning Beefcake into a face and making him Brutus the Barber Beefcake, coming from his tag team with the Dream Team with Greg the Hammer Valentine. Just a great thing, a great spectacle. Probably would have honestly made the list if it wasn't overshadowed by what else happened on the WrestleMania 3 card. But in a standalone match itself, it was great. It was fun. It was interesting. It was cool. And if it would have been Piper's send-off, it would have been a great way to send him off. Now, from WrestleMania 8, Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Bret the Hitman Hart for the Intercontinental title. This was Piper, I believe he was on his way out in the WWE, or he was transitioning to an announcer role. Trust me, there were plenty of times where him and WWE didn't get along and he had left for certain periods, or he had became an announcer and then went back to wrestling, or vice versa. This was one of these times, and in doing so, he took an opportunity to put over a young wrestler who hadn't got his single break yet, in Bret the Hitman Hart. Hart gets the win. We see Bret Hart go on to be one of the great wrestlers of all time. Rowdy Roddy Piper endorses him on the way out, hugs him. We have an amazing match on a nice little fun WrestleMania show. Probably one of the shining moments on WrestleMania 8. And last but not least, on our best of the rest, Rowdy Roddy Piper on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Just a great funny show. They did an episode where they had a retired wrestler, a washed up wrestler, and they brought in Piper as the guy named the Maniac. Just a cool and funny part, kind of poking fun of himself, poking fun of the industry. You know, not in a mean-spirited way, but just a fun and funny show. Now, before we get into our number one, we say this on every top 10. If you like what you've seen, if you don't like what we have, if we put something up too high, something down too low, left something off the list altogether, let us know what you think. Hit us up on Facebook, hit us up on Twitter, put it down where? Down there in the comments. And last but not least, our number one Rowdy Roddy Piper moment. Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Greg the Hammer Valentine from Starrcade 1983 in a dog collar match. Just a brutal, violent, bloody culmination of a feud. Two guys that are absolutely at the top of their game at the time. Just the level of intensity and the level of hatred in this made this match so iconic and so legendary. Probably the greatest match of either man's career. Just the level of brutality, the level of violence, the level of vitriol, everything about it. Like I said with a couple of the other things, Piper had a way to make you believe that the other person really hated him. And he made the other person look like they were fighting against one of the most evil men at the time. Now, I believe at the time Piper was the face and Valentine was the heel. So it was Valentine that he got over as being the hated guy, where he became the face. And this was just an amazing match, amazing ring psychology. If you want to teach anything what ring psychology is, this is one of the matches you want to throw in there. They did a lot with just a little bit. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, there's a lot of hardcore matches. There's a lot of really violent matches. But none are remembered as much as this one. Or not many are remembered, I shall rephrase. And that is because the reasoning behind it. Everything had a reason. Piper choked Valentine. Valentine bloodied Piper. It was all with reason. And it all made sense in the context of that match. That's why it sticks out so vividly. It's like an Eddie Van Halen guitar solo by itself is great. Sounds awesome. It's cool. You might remember it for a couple of years. However, if it's in the context of a great song, and it fits the parameters of the song, you remember it much better later. And that's what this was. In the context of the feud, in the context of the match, you remember this so much because so much of the hatred came through, and you could see it on your screen. And the thing I wanted to really mention before I get off of this top 10, if you look at this was the first Starrcade. He played a huge role in the hype for the first Starrcade with this match, one of the big matches on the card. He also played a big role in the first match, or in the first Wrestlemania, getting that off the ground. So Piper, you could say, launched two of the most successful pay-per-view wrestling franchises, Starrcade and Wrestlemania. Basically, if you don't remember, Starrcade was NWA and then later WCW's answer to Wrestlemania. Even it came before Wrestlemania, we all know that. That was their Super Bowl, as to Wrestlemania was WWE's Super Bowl. And Piper was right there in the thick of things, inventing both of them. And that's the main thing we want to remember about Rowdy Roddy Piper. He was a guy that started up and was right there in the middle of everything. He made fans like myself tune in to see what he was going to do next. He drew the ratings up. He was a star. There's very few stars at the magnitude of Piper, and there are very few that ever will be. Unfortunately, the world has lost a great talent, and from all accounts, a pretty good man. I'm saddened to say that one of my absolute favorite wrestlers of all time has passed away. In a few days, it's going to, the numbness will go down and it'll dissipate, and I'll be able to remember him for all the greatness, all this great stuff I mentioned here, plus the tons of other hundreds and thousands of hours of entertainment he's given me. That being said, I did this top 10 as a tribute to you, Piper. Rest in peace, Hot Rod. One of my idols. The guy that made me into a professional wrestling fan. Thank you for everything you did, and I appreciate everything you did for all of us fans. And with that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.